Um, how would you assess and compare the personalities of Washington and Monroe? How were they similar? How were they different?
I think to the degree that you can judge from our vantage point, and it has to be from the evidence, what they themselves might have said, what others said about them, and then just apply a little Kentucky windage to it. It was evident that they were both men who cared very much about how they were perceived within the world in which they lived and operated. They had very strong senses of personal honor, of their reputation, and each had a temper, which they generally sought to keep in check. But when it revealed itself in either man, it was remarkable because it could be pretty vehement. And yet, I think realizing the extent of their tempers, they sought very hard to control them. I think both Washington and Monroe essentially saw themselves as gentlemen farmers or aspiring to that. Washington had considerably better success at it,
Yeah.
Even though he had challenges. Started from a better place too in terms of family resources and everything. But in both cases, whatever happened in their careers, whether it be in war or in peace and politics, they both expressed this longing to get back, in Washington's case, to his vine and fig tree. And the call of duty kept taking them away from that at one point or another. And long after Washington was dead, it still kept happening to Monroe. He'd take on another diplomatic posting or accept an office. And it was really a struggle for him to ever get the sort of farm situation that he felt would have been ideal. He had three of them that he lived on at various times, and really Oak Hill, his last home, was the one that came closest to what he wanted. So in those respects, I think they shared a great love of the identification of being part of the gentry of the soil. Each in his own way, too, obviously was very strongly devoted to the American Republic. They saw it through somewhat different lenses in terms of not only our domestic politics, but our foreign relations. But I think at heart, there was more similar in what they wanted for the country, what they wanted to achieve than different. But the differences kept them apart into, I think, their mutual regret. They were never able to bridge them.
Well, I think this is an interesting question. As we know that political disagreements in this era sometimes led to duels. Is there any evidence that the conflict between these two might have ever come to such a result?
I have not found it. And I'd kind of wondered that too. You certainly writing on congressional violence, and Joanne Freeman, who spoke at Great Lives last year, who we've had at the James Monroe Museum, has certainly made a career of talking about affairs of honor and the degree to which political differences could evolve into violent confrontations. It didn't get that far with Washington and Monroe between them, as far as I can tell. Monroe did compose a letter to Washington that he never sent, and it's probably best that he didn't, because it was the most blunt and scathing and very personal attack on Washington as having been one of the worst things that ever happened to the country. One of the greatest dangers to the American Republic, he felt, was Washington and his administration. That's an amazing thing for anyone to have said about Washington. For Monroe to have said it, it might have been just too much, but he didn't send the letter. Ironically, though, in all the Donnybrook that followed his French mission and coming back in disgrace and humiliation, one person who did get under his skin was John Adams, the vice president, who was very openly critical of Monroe and sort of characterized him as a whining, washed-up politician. And Monroe contemplated the possibility of challenging Adams to a duel. Again, just sort of personal consultation with friends. Didn't act on it, partly because of Adams' age and maybe because he was president of the United States.
Yeah, that too.
And they later made up. So that turned out good in the long run. But he was thinking about it in the context of this, just not with Washington.